This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Combating inflation and economic revival, topping concerns at the first policy speech by Japan's new Prime Minister. Security also in focus, with Sanae Takaichi vowing to lift defense spending to 2% of GDP 2 years early. Now, Beijing warns of intensifying competition between major powers as its new 5-year plan puts tech leadership and a strong domestic market at the core of its strategy. China also urging vigilance ahead of Hong Kong's LegCo election, vowing a swift crackdown on any bid to disrupt or interfere with the vote in December. And in business news, South Korea says a deal on a $350 billion investment pledge with the U.S. may slip past an upcoming summit, with both sides still divided on key issues.
Now, I think this is good time for us to improve the relationship without losing our basic policy and identity.
CNA's exclusive interview with South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun on how Seoul hopes to balance ties with neighboring China and more. Sanae Takaichi, Japan's newly elected prime minister, delivered her first policy address today, pledging to make the fight against inflation and economic revival her top focus.
この内閣が最優先で取り組むことは、国民の皆様が直面している物価高への対応です。暮らしの安心を確実かつ迅速に届けてまいります。この内閣では、経済あっての財政の考え方を基本とします。強い経済を構築するため、責任ある積極財政の考え方のもと、戦略的に財政出動を行います。
Well, unlike some of her predecessors, Ms. Takaichi promised to spend more to spur growth, saying an economic stimulus package will be announced soon, backed by a supplementary budget. On national security, the new leader struck a firm tone, vowing to lift defense spending to 2% of GDP within the fiscal year.
我が国として主体的に防衛力の抜本的強化を進めることが必要です。このため、国家安全保障戦略に定める対 GDP 比 2% 水準について、補正予算と合わせて今年度中に前倒しして措置を講じます。また、来年中に3文書を改定することを目指し、検討を開始します。
We do have plenty to unpack, so let's bring in Kazuto Suzuki, Professor of Science and Technology Policy, Graduate School of Public Policy, University of Tokyo, Japan. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. Before we dive into the details, let's talk about the first impressions, because that matter. And rate the new Prime Minister's speech out of 10, on her strategy, her funding plan, her timeline. Where did it surprise you, and also where did she overpromise?
Well, she hasn't really surprised me. So it was about, 8 out of 10. She did what she needs to do. She's running a minority government, and she has newly made a coalition with Ishin, the Japan Renovation Party, which is also a very hawkish party, but it's a different kind of hawkishness. The Ishin is the local Osaka local party. So Takaichi has to focus on the domestic economy, and she has this stimulus package to increase spending, which is her policy, but also she's forced to do that because to run the minority government. So I think in terms of the defense spending, well, to increasing the defense spending for 2%, 2 years earlier than the objective, is because the change of the situation in United States, the Trump administration is forcing us to pay more, and the situation in China and North Korea is very much of the threatening situation for Japan. So basically, I think what Takaichi did is what she has to do necessarily, and I think it's a very very sober and salient policies.
Yeah, she devoted more than half a speech talking about the economy, striking quite a different note from past leaders, where she says that wages must beat inflation without dumping the burden on businesses. So, Professor, do you think Ms. Takaichi, did she do enough to actually convince the Conservatives and the wider public?
Well, I think so. I think her approval rate is much higher than the Ishiba and the Kishida. So she's just wiping off all the scandals and negative image of the LDP. She take a very strong leadership, and I think she's giving a very a strong support from the younger generation, which was very unusual for the LDP. So probably I think she is selling a right policy to the public.
And to defense, which appears to be her boldest promise yet, the original target for 2% of GDP in defense spending was 2027, but now you sort of push that ahead. But I'm wondering, Professor, who's going to be paying for that, though? I mean, where's the money going to come from? Are we talking about taxes, more debt cuts, and also, I mean, how are voters going to feel about that?
Well, I think, she's taking a sort of a safer road, usually, increasing the tobacco taxes or the indirect taxes in various goods. She's not going to focus on the consumption tax, which is a very highly contentious taxes, and Ishin wants to cut, and the other opposition wants to cut. So I think, because of her minority position, she cannot touch upon the consumption tax. So probably the direct, the income taxes or the inheritance taxes, these are the major targets. But I think, this is quite unpopular. So for a moment, she's going to increase debts. But so far, I think, Japanese debt level is critical. So I think to a certain extent that what she says about the responsible spending policy, she needs to do some sort of a tax reform as well as the spending reform. And probably the major objective is to cut the social security spending.
Right. And of course, with a minority government, that could make or break those plans that she has. What do you think is Takaichi's plan B if the opposition, blocks her from passing the budgets or making those rule changes?
Well, I don't think she has a plan B. She goes along with the demand from the opposition. I think there's a consensus among the LDP that Takaichi is a strong leader and take the leadership to convince the opposition. Fortunately, the Ishin, the Renovation Party, is giving the full support for Takaichi. So only 2 seats missing in the lower house and the 5 seats missing in the upper house. So she can collect sort of an individual votes from the non-independent, members. So I think there is not much of the harder negotiation that she needs to do with the largest opposition such as the constitutional democratic parties. So I think Takaichi will be staying on her course, and I think because of her popularity, and I think this is critical for Takaichi to maintain the high popular support in order to convince the other members.
Right, an 8 out of 10 of that scorecard you gave her, not too shabby at all. Thanks so very much for your time and thoughts. Appreciate that. Kazuto Suzuki, Professor of Science and Technology Policy and a Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo in Japan. Right, and don't miss our deep dive into who Japan's new Prime Minister is. We've got CNA's Genevieve Wu speaking to senior correspondent Michio Ishida to find out more about Sanae Takaichi, from her potential policies to her penchant for heavy metal music. Well, do head to YouTube, Spotify, CNA.Asia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leaders in East Asia are on the move over the next week, with high-level events bringing them together in Malaysia and South Korea. CNA's Genevieve Wu looks at who's meeting who, where, and for what.
The coming days will be marked by a diplomatic deluge here in Asia, starting with a major gathering this weekend. As we've been telling you, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is holding its Leaders Summit in Kuala Lumpur. This year's bloc chair, Malaysia, is welcoming a long list of bold-faced names. Among them, the leaders of the US, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the EU, and South Africa. China's premier is heading to KL too. Then we are tracking President Donald Trump's Asia tour. He's in Japan for 3 days from October 27th, where he's meeting new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Then it's off to South Korea for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Gyeongju. And here's where things get even busier. Plus, the stakes could get even higher. Mr. Trump is set to sit down with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung on October 29th. A day later, the White House says he will meet China's President Xi Jinping, with the world's top two economies yet to resolve their worsening trade war. Mr. Yi is hosting both leaders for state visits. So, along with Mr. Trump, he's having a one-on-one with Mr. Xi. And he also says he'll make time for Japan's PM. Plus, there'll be talks with the other APEC leaders visiting Gyeongju. And there's something of a wild card. Will President Trump try to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un? The last time he was in South Korea in 2019, the pair held an impromptu get-together at the demilitarized zone, with Mr. Trump becoming the first sitting U.S. president to cross the border into North Korea. That was their third summit. And Mr. Trump is open to a fourth one with Mr. Kim, who he calls a smart guy. The North Korean leader had suggested he could return to talks, but only if the Americans drop their, quote, delusional obsession with denuclearization of his country. So, some speculation, some things set in stone. Either way, the coming days will see hyper-speed diplomacy with varying issues up for discussion, from trade and tariffs to pressing economic and security matters.
The Central Committee of the Communist Party of China has warned that strategic competition among major powers has grown more intense. It says navigating the global situation and enhancing China's international status is at the forefront of the party's 15th five-year plan. Well, the plan basically spells out goals for economic and social development. China wants to be a global leader in science and technology over the next 10 years. It also wants to create a robust and large domestic market. Officials this morning said that the economy is on a solid foundation, even as external risks and uncertainties are growing.
国际形势演变深刻影响国内发展，我国发展处于战略机遇和风险挑战并存、不确定难预料因素增多的时期。
CNA's Tanya Yuguan was monitoring the news conference this morning, and he joins us now to break it all down. So, Yuguan, what were some of the highlights from this morning's session?
Well, it was a very long news conference, about 2 hours long. But one key takeaway I got from this morning was the palpable sense of confidence from China's policymakers that their heady mix of socialism, central planning, and market economics is working. This largely stems from the progress made by the 14th five-year plan, and in no small part thanks to how China has been able to stand up to pressure from the United States. Now, the director of the Central Policy Research Office even said, I quote, "Many foreign political parties envy us for formulating long-term plans," unquote. Now, that statement today really shows that, the kind of confidence they have. And essentially, it also shows in the kind of policies that are rolled out. There are no major surprises, just minor adjustments to priorities. There is renewed emphasis on driving growth through industrial innovation, upgrading, as well as calls for accelerating agricultural and rural modernization and revitalization. revitalization. All language we have heard before. There were also calls for further opening up of the economy to both investment and trade, both inward and outwards. One official noted that China moving forward would not just be looking at GDP, but GNP as well. In other words, China will be looking not just at the gross domestic product, but also the gross national product that is taking into account the economic output of Chinese companies based overseas. Now, what really stood out for me, aside from all that, is really the statement on government investment. We know that given Chinese tech companies are increasingly shut out from Western capital markets, government investment is increasingly an important part of their capital flow. This morning, the head of China's National Development Planning body says they are proposing that Beijing optimizes the structure of government investment. And I quote, increase the proportion of government investment in people's livelihood. He also touched on the role of local governments, which are often the source of capital investments for their local tech champions. And as a result, multiple companies engage in cutthroat competition. He calls for the breaking down of local protection and market segmentation for local governments' economic promotion behavior to be standardized, and to rectify the involution competition, or nature as we know it. The devil, of course, is in the details, but clearly there would be changes in store in how local governments dishes out subsidies. At the very least, with this statement out, they'll be more cautious about dishing them out. It could also signal more central control over tech companies, over the tech companies that local governments should bet on. It could mean some tech companies may be allowed to die a rightful death, while the remaining ones may finally show some profit and perhaps finally attract some private capital investment. That's quite a fundamental change in how things work now, Oteli.
Indeed. Well, thanks very much for that report. CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yuguan, live from Shanghai. Now, to further unpack the implications of China's latest five-year plan, I'll be speaking with Wang Huiyao, founder of the Center for China and Globalization and former counselor of the China State Council, a little later this hour. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Japan's largest gas company signs a pact with President Donald Trump's pet energy project, days ahead of his visit to the Asian nation. Plus, supertanker freight rates spike as buyers rush to alternatives following sanctions on Russia's two biggest oil companies. Hello there, you're watching East Asia tonight, and it is now time for your business news with Olivia Mazuki. So, Olivia, there has been a lot of interest in the upcoming meeting between the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. What exactly has the build-up been like?
Well, there has been a sense of cautious optimism there, Oteli, with South Korean officials talking up relations with Washington, pushing aside lingering trade concerns, and the markets have been pretty upbeat. But ahead of next week's meeting between the leaders on the sidelines of the APEC summit, South Korea's industry minister has hinted that a deal over Seoul's $350 billion investment pledge may not be reached in time. Kim Jong-kwon says that Washington and Seoul differ on how much the cash component should be. Seoul wants it smaller and Washington bigger. South Korean automakers are at a disadvantage against their Japanese peers the longer the negotiations drag on. Until the two sides can finalize a deal, U.S. auto tariffs on South Korean cars stand at 25% instead of the 15% agreed in July. South Korea has been reluctant to sign off on a deal, citing the potential impact on local currency markets. Seoul is concerned that U.S. cash demands will cause a massive dollar outflow, weakening the won. The Bank of Korea says that anything more than $20 billion a year will affect currency markets. But local media reported yesterday that Washington was demanding $25 billion annually for 8 years. Greater China markets getting a boost today after policymakers set the country's course over the next 5 years, and as Beijing struck an optimistic note ahead of the expected Trump-Xi meeting next week. Equity traders giving a big cheer to the news. Shanghai Composite Index there ended a volatile week at 10-year high, and the Shenzhen component closing 2% stronger, and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong firmer by 0.7%. China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao expressing confidence that both sides can address each other's concerns and find ways to work together. And that came as a new round of trade talks between high-level officials got underway in Malaysia. The White House confirmed face-to-face talks on the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea next week, but Beijing has yet to comment on that meeting. The remarks also come after China unveiled its outline for economic and other policy goals for 2026-2030. The detailed plan will be made public early next year, but the leadership is seen prioritizing manufacturing and technology reliance over consumption. Yeah, we're seeing strong finish for shares of chip makers and AI stocks. They're key in China's power rivalry with the U.S. Significant gains across the board, especially for SMIC. They're more than 8% surge. The tech-focused Star 50 index also shot up by 4.4%. Paul Ho of UOB Asset Management highlights what stood out to him from China's fourth plenum and what the five-year plan means for the world's second-largest economy.
Two particular phrases jump out at me. The first is self-sufficiency. And I interpret that as self-sufficiency in tech, in food supplies, energy, resources, etc. And the second phrase that jumps out at me, I think, is the mention of high-quality development. So I think China is trying to hasten the development of green initiatives. We see that continuing in the next 5 years. And then for me, high quality also means, getting rid of some of the older, less efficient capacity in traditional industries like steel making, for instance, or in manufacturing. So that ties up with, earlier talks about anti-involution. I think what we will see in the next 5 years, and indeed maybe in the next 10, 15 years, is the increasing technological content in manufacturing. So I think all the older ways of manufacturing or older machineries, older processes, that has to be replaced by more high-tech stuff, like robotics, for instance, AI. So advanced manufacturing. I think China has definitely to climb up the value-add ladder. And that's the only way to boost the income of the people in the long run. And hence, that would in turn drive consumption in a more sustainable way.
The cost of moving oil across the seas is surging after the U.S. hit two major Russian oil producers with new sanctions. And industry data noted a sharp surge in supertanker freight rates on the Middle East to China route. Forward agreements for November jumped almost 16%, the highest level since early 2023. December contracts also surged about 13%, reflecting expectations of continued demand for shipping. Freight future traders are betting on higher costs of shipping crude oil in the months ahead amid tight tanker supply. Indian and Chinese buyers are seen shifting from Russia to the Middle East to make up for the shortfall, creating a rush for supertankers, driving up transport costs. Analysts warn that the scramble for replacement crude will be larger and more sustained. The latest U.S. sanctions follow years of pressure from both the Biden and Trump administration to deter Asian refiners from buying Russian oil, a move that has so far been ineffective. Russia still exported about 7.3 million barrels a day in August, roughly 7% of global oil demand. Japan's largest gas company, Tokyo Gas, has signed a preliminary agreement to explore buying LNG from the Alaska LNG project, which is President Donald Trump's so-called pet energy project. And this comes ahead of the U.S. president's visit to Japan next week. Tokyo Gas signed a non-binding agreement with Glenfarne Group, developer of the Alaska LNG project, and that's for the potential purchase of 1 million tons of LNG a year. Tokyo Gas said it would gather information on the project and evaluate its economic viability. Glenfarne also said it has preliminary agreements with other LNG buyers in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Thailand, totaling 11 million tons per annum. The move marks an advance for the $44 billion Alaska LNG project that has attracted doubts because of its high costs. Well, Japan's long-term incremental purchase of U.S. energy are part of a wider trade commitment inked in July, which resulted in a reduction to a 15% tariff on all Japanese imports to the U.S., as well as Tokyo committing to a $550 billion investment in the U.S. And Japan's inflation rose last month on account of higher food and energy prices. It climbed 2.9% on year in September compared to 2.7% in August. Core inflation, which includes energy but excludes food, also ticked higher by the same number, 2.9%, for the first time in more than 5 months. Newly elected Prime Minister Takaichi is said to be preparing an economic stimulus package to help households tackle inflation. Reports say the package could include electricity and gas subsidies. Japan, as we know, is highly dependent on oil imports, but investors are shrugging off concerns over rising oil prices. The Nikkei 225 ending the final day of the week 1.3% firmer. Japanese yen is hovering at 152.93 level to the greenback. South Korea's Kospi rising by more than 2%, hitting a record high amid regional gains as a planned meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, as well as a summit between Washington and Seoul, raised the hopes to ease trade tensions. Won strengthened about 0.18. It's at 1,439 to the U.S. dollar. And that's all I have in business, Oteli. Back to you, and happy
teaching. Detailed report. Well, thank you so much, Olivia. Well, I think it's time for us to go for a break now, but coming up next, China in its new 5-year plan pledging major investments in high-tech industries over the next decade as it aims towards self-sufficiency. How will that boost Beijing's standing as a global leader in science and technology? We'll get more insights from an expert in just a moment. And CNA speaks exclusively with South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun on his country's ties with the U.S. and China, and more. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Japan's newly minted leader delivers a first policy address to Parliament. Sanae Takaichi vowing fiscal stimulus for economic growth and a boost in defense spending amid rising regional tensions. South Korea says a deal on a $350 billion investment pledge with the U.S. may slip past an upcoming summit, with both sides still divided on key issues. And the Communist Party of China spells out a raft of economic and security goals for its 15th 5-year plan. Beijing striving to be a global leader in science and technology as it looks to create a robust domestic market amid growing external risks. U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will make state visits next week to South Korea, which is hosting the APEC Leaders Summit. President Lee Jae-myung will hold meetings with Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi separately. Well, CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk sat down with the Foreign Minister Cho Hyun in an exclusive interview to hear his thoughts on how Seoul hopes to balance relations between the U.S. and China and on other regional issues.
It would be a meaningful visit for President Xi Jinping. It's happening up in 11 years' time. So we look forward to it. And when we talk about balancing, we don't mean that we are standing in the middle. Depending on the issues, we can have cooperation with China, but somewhat different ideas with China.
What outcome would be most important for South Korea during that summit?
Above all, trust building with the new government, because the previous Korean government has been rather criticized for its statements and foreign policy by China. But now I think this is good time for us to improve the relationship without losing our basic policy and identity.
But recently China has sanctioned South Korean companies like Hanwha Ocean. Is this something that could come up during the summit meeting?
Well, I am concerned about the specific sanction on this company, but we will be able to sort out such problems. And China seems to be fully aware of the need for cooperation with Korea as well.
Well, if we can talk about the South Korea and the United States is still negotiating a trade deal. Are you optimistic that you might be able to have a trade deal before the end of the month?
It's a good possibility, so I remain optimistic, but maybe cautiously.
You said earlier also that there was a rough agreement on security and that Seoul is seeking to sign a deal with the United States. What areas of consensus have been agreed?
A number of important issues under the circumstances. So modernization of the Korean defense and enhancement of ally relationship. All of these things have been discussed.
Is this something that we can look forward to during APEC, the signing between the two countries?
It's again a possibility. We are trying to incorporate all the things, including the tariff issues, to be concluded as a single undertaking. But it's something we have to fine-tune before the visit of President Trump.
Minister, you said in Parliament earlier that the U.S. is not the same cooperative partner it once was. What specifically has changed?
We were requested to put money for investment. Yes, we can make it a win-win outcome, but still it has been an unprecedented request from an ally. But there are many positive things. I feel that the traditional ally relationship has to be adjusted to the changing challenges of the world.
President Lee Jae-myung recently said that Seoul would accept a freeze first step in denuclearizing North Korea. Is this something that you've proposed or discussed with Secretary Rubio's team? And is this something that Washington would be open to?
Well, we've been talking about it very closely with the only purpose that first we reduce the tension on the Korean Peninsula and then try to achieve rather permanent peace settlement and finally achieve dismantlement of nuclear, that is denuclearization. And these objectives are very important to us, and it's been keenly discussed with America.
There's a lot of talk of possibly President Trump going to the DMZ to meet with Kim Jong-un.
It remains a possibility, and I still do not want to preclude that possibility.
But is that something that South Korea is hoping will take place?
If it happens, we will support it. We will try our best to make this meeting successful.
Well, in Japan, your nearest neighbor, it has a new prime minister now. Do you expect her to take a hawkish stance on relations with South Korea?
I don't think so, because yes, indeed, this is a new government, new leader, but President Lee Jae-myung has established, restored a shuttle diplomacy, and we have done what we can. So the new leader, will be able to live up to our expectations. There was a frame that President Lee Jae-myung, before he was elected, would become anti-Japan. But it has not I mean, it has been proven not to be the case. I think we can think about the case, and under the circumstances of the changed international situation, Japan, I mean, the Japanese leader might also think about the need for a closer relationship with Korea.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, we'll tell you what to expect from the upcoming ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. The Chinese Communist Party says strategic competition among major powers has intensified as its Central Committee lays out key goals in the party's 15th five-year plan. Well, earlier we spoke to Dylan Low from Nanyang Technological University about the party's leadership's focus compared to 10 years ago.
I think it's different in its scope. When you say made in China, it seems to be all-encompassing, including almost everything that you can think about. But this is a bit more targeted, emphasis on science and on technology. Now, why science and technology? I think because these are the areas that China sees will help it make the next lap in achieving its very ambitious goals in 2035. But beyond the domestic benefits, especially with regards to economy, with regards to creating new quality productive forces, it is almost impossible to ignore the geopolitical context and backdrop to this. When you say you want to be self-reliant in science and technology, I think this tells me that it is also driven at the same time beyond the economic considerations and the benefits by national security concerns. And this notion of self-sufficiency, particularly on bottlenecks, I think that's also a clarion call to redouble efforts in areas where it sees as game changers, frontier technologies. At the same time, it also serves as a protective shield, if you will, with regards to what other countries may do in regards to export controls, with regards to chips, to give another example. Because the geopolitical environment is such that it's very difficult to get access at this very moment, the cutting-edge chips that it needs to make the leap. But at the same time, there are lots of good things going for China with regards to science and technology. They are a leader in AI. They are a leader in renewable energy, on electric vehicles, and in data processing. So what I see as greater self-reliance, there's two parts to it. One is to double down on things that they already established themselves as leaders in and move into adjacent categories. For example, in renewable technology, in EVs, they've already got the talent pool, the capabilities, the deep infrastructure. It's not that difficult to shift this to adjacent areas such as smart energy grids, such as new energy storage solutions. And the second part is to find new areas, the next AI or the next EV. The capacity is there. And I think that the communique also signals very strongly the policy intent to do that as well, and to find and make the first, or rather have the first mover advantage in those new frontier areas. But I think to me, the biggest political risk is in geopolitics. If the current relationship between US and China worsens, and if we get into this escalation cycle where both sides punish each other, make use of their economic dependencies and punish each other and use it for leverage, then we are going to be in for a very tough time. I think China will have obstacles, very clear obstacles to achieving technological self-reliance. Almost like a paradoxical situation, because they see the dangers of decoupling, they need to double down on self-reliance. But this doubling down on self-reliance will be read by its rivals and its adversaries as trying to decouple, as trying to maintain its advantages that it has, which might elicit a counter-response as well. So in the short, medium term, it's very difficult, but not impossible. If there is a sort of deal or negotiation that's going to take place, I think it's going to be very positive, not only to China, but to the rest of the world as well.
The Chinese Premier Li Qiang will be in Singapore from tomorrow at the invitation of Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. This is Mr. Li's first official visit to the country and follows Prime Minister Wong's earlier visit to China in June. Both sides mark 35 years of diplomatic ties this year. Well, Mr. Li will receive a ceremonial welcome and have a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Wong. Both leaders will also witness the exchange of agreements in areas such as green development, digital economy, as well as training. Mr. Li will call on acting President Eddie Teo and meet with Singapore and Chinese business leaders at a roundtable. China's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office has warned against election interference as nominations open today in Hong Kong to elect its next batch of lawmakers. It released a statement saying anti-China forces have never stopped trying to interfere and have a history of creating chaos at every election. Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee presided over a ceremony to start election season yesterday. Nominations will run for 2 weeks, ending a month before polling day on December 7th. 90 members will be elected into the next Legislative Council, or LegCo. The outgoing lawmakers held their last meeting yesterday. They were the first batch to hold office after Beijing changed Hong Kong's electoral system to ensure only those considered patriots could serve. More than 20, or about a quarter of the outgoing LegCo members, have declared they will not run again. Nearly half are 70 years old or older. Well, there's been widespread speculation that an age cap has been imposed, though no announcement has been made. 2025 has been described as a year of resilience for ASEAN. Domestic demand kept economies afloat, with most members posting stronger than expected growth, despite shocks from U.S. tariffs and global uncertainties. Well, the bloc's leaders will be looking to sustain this momentum and also strengthen intra-region trade as they gather in Kuala Lumpur this weekend. CNA's senior correspondent, Afifa Arifin, with more.
When Washington announced a sweeping set of tariffs earlier this year, Southeast Asian exporters braced for impact. But exemptions on key products such as semiconductors and fuel helped cushion the blow, and most ASEAN economies still managed to post stronger than expected growth. Even so, tariff turbulence and slowing Chinese demand are keeping investors cautious, adding urgency to this week's summit in Kuala Lumpur. And it's getting an unusual boost in attention, with U.S. President Donald Trump set to make an appearance.
To have the U.S. President attend the summit, which shows that this region is not forgotten by the U.S. The appearance of U.S. President Trump here at such a crucial time in global geoeconomic uncertainties, I think is a big signal to his willingness to mainstream the ASEAN agenda as part of the wider Asia agenda for the U.S. And this will provide positive signaling to the investment community.
While Trump's visit underscores renewed U.S. interest, ASEAN's focus will be on delivering tangible economic results. Leaders are expected to endorse upgraded trade frameworks, which includes the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement 2.0, aimed at boosting intra-ASEAN trade and removing lingering barriers, as well as the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, or DEFA, to deepen digital integration. The bloc will also update its free trade pact with China, expanding cooperation into emerging sectors like digital technology and green growth.
What the ASEAN nations have been focusing on more recently is trying to enhance these agreements to make them fit for purpose, because a lot of these agreements were, particularly the ASEAN plus FTAs, were introduced at an earlier time. So that has been one of Malaysia's priority, sort of economic deliverables as, ASEAN chair, to try to update these agreements.
Malaysia will also host the 5th RCEP leaders meeting on the sidelines of the 47th ASEAN Summit. The regional comprehensive economic partnership brings together 15 Asia-Pacific nations under the world's largest free trade pact, covering a third of global GDP. The meeting will focus on making RCEP more accessible for small and medium enterprises, while reaffirming ASEAN's central role in regional trade. From tariffs to trade deals, green growth to digital cooperation, ASEAN's economic agenda is packed with ambition. The test now is whether leaders can deliver unity, credibility and tangible gains as the bloc looks beyond resilience. Afifa Arifin, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Besides tariffs and trade, other key issues will be on the table, and that includes the conflict in Myanmar and Timor-Leste's accession. Now, earlier, Asia First spoke with Dr. Lin Kwok, the Lee Kuan Yew chair at the Brookings Institution, about these challenges.
In terms of the Myanmar conflict, I think that has been going on for several years now, and the 5-point peace plan has not actually achieved very much. The Myanmar junta has basically thumbed its nose at the 5-point peace plan, which sought a cessation of hostilities, of all parties speaking, and even those sort of basic things have not been achieved. So I doubt that we're going to see any cessation of the immediate hostilities or a more long-lasting political agreement. And added to that, of course, is the additional complication that Myanmar is slated to hold elections at the and ASEAN will come under some pressure not to recognize what the international community sees as, or many parts of the international community see as, an illegitimate election. So optimism in terms of the Cambodia-Thailand deal, less optimism in terms of the Myanmar situation.
And Lynn, another very, very big event that will be happening at the ASEAN summit is the formal admission of Timor-Leste as the 11th member of the bloc. Is this a milestone or a headache for the bloc's ability to act? Because as we know, consensus is already so hard to achieve.
I think it's both. It's certainly a milestone. Timor-Leste has been waiting in the wings for some time. And I think its former leader actually talked about, or its leader has talked about how difficult it is to enter ASEAN, more difficult than entering heaven. So a milestone for Timor-Leste and for, the sort of aspirations that ASEAN holds out. It's also a headache because, there are various challenges that will obviously, that Timor-Leste's entry into ASEAN will pose. First, Timor-Leste is a very poor country. It's still developing, and it constitutes only 0.1% of ASEAN's GDP. So whether or not it will be able to lift itself up through its own capacity, but also through help from ASEAN member states and other countries, that will be an important question to how much of a headache it is. Second, one should also be looking at the ability of Timor-Leste to balance great powers in the region or in its country. It's ideologically closer to the West, given its democratic credentials, but it also welcomes and it's open to and needs Chinese investment. So the ability to balance between China and the United States will be important.
I hope you've enjoyed this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.